Hey, Dan.
How's it going? It's been a
How
while.
are you? Good to see you.
I have so many of these things every week that sometimes it's like, oh, but I got to see Michael when I have a chance.
Hey, Dan. It's been a while.
It has.
How
Well,
you doing?
we all want to see Mike.
Looking around to the Book of Job this year again. I may have to have you come reprise.
Hey, bring me on.
Cool.
I love talking on podcasts about something other than how stupid BYU is.
Eric. Eric's in the mountains.
Howdy.
Hi. Hi, Andrew. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to have you here. And
Thank you.
We've got Maxine Hanks.
Hi, cuz.
Face.
This is the thing right now.
Ryan Reddy.
Mark Deesman is here.
Oh, good.
Maxine Hanks is here.
Yeah, Mio and Charlene Durham and Taylor Webb, all kinds of wonderful people.
This is my contact information.
This is great.
Website.
John Ogden again. Wonderful.
What's wrong with this?
So if you're not speaking, then you probably ought to mute yourself.
They're not the same size of.
I can hear some voices. Mark, there you go. Please mute yourselves. Hi, Sonia.
I'm going to mute everybody. So if you're going to speak.
Awesome. Thank you. That'd be great. That would be great. Okay, well, we have plenty of people here, so we're going to start on time for once instead of Mormon time, which is awesome. I am so excited to see all of you good folks. Thank you for coming tonight. Super excited to have Michael Austin, who I found to be a very thoughtful and heartfelt person, you know, and when I suggested this topic, when I said, you know, I'd like to talk about kind of this thing, and he said, well, that's a hard one. But I know he could do it. He's done more challenging things than this. So I'm grateful always to have Jana hosting this Zoom conversation, not just for being the one with a big enough Zoom to hold everybody, but because she has a big enough brain and heart to hold everybody. So an experience. So I'm appreciate that. And thanks for some of you who haven't seen in a while to be here. It's wonderful. Normally we would have, so this is kind of a Think Again, Faith Again. It's kind of in between. But so if it was a Faith Again, we'd have a musical number at the beginning. But our friend Annie Pitcher Davis is having some technical difficulties, so she's going to do a musical number at the end. And it has a little bit to do with helping us think of Ukraine and that big deal that's going on right now. You probably saw in my email that I sent out, I gave some links to legitimate sources. One of them is my rabbi friend down the street, who I saw at the rally on Monday, and he gave me a couple of sources. I put one on there. And the other is from, interestingly enough, Squarespace, who is mostly housed in Ukraine. And I've done a couple of websites for clients there, and they posted this and said, here's some sources that you can, and plus letter writing, other things besides just giving money. So kind of top of mind right now, as it should be for us. Let's see, what else? I think that's mainly it. Because of what's going on, I would like to begin with an opening prayer. And I have not thought of anybody in particular. Jenna, would you mind? Maybe just a little bit of pause, a moment of silence, and we can breathe, and then will you bring us in and with a prayer, invocation? Thank you. You're unmuted, right? Okay.
I am. So our dear Creator God, please be with all of the people of the earth at this tender moment in our history. Please help the people of Ukraine feel of the support of their brothers and sisters and siblings across the globe. Please buoy up their hearts and their strength to withstand their oppressors. Please unite all of our hearts and our efforts toward bringing a resolution and to strengthening our resolve and our systems to reflect the majority of the hearts on earth that yearn for peace and unity. And we pray for this and for love to reign and for goodness to win over all of these atrocities and all others that are going on in our world, and unite our hearts together in love. And we say these things in the name of Jesus and all the holy names of God. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. You know, in the good old days when we'd meet in person, we would we'd ask questions of the presenter that they hadn't been informed that they would be asked. So here's 3 questions, Michael.
Okay.
What is a favorite book? It doesn't have to be the favorite, but a favorite book of yours.
Oh my gosh, that's a hard one. I am going to say my favorite book right now is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. And there are lots of reasons for that, but I think that is a book that I love. Another book that I love is Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain. And there are a few others, but I'm basically a lit person. Everything else is just exploratory discipline hopping.
I love it. Thank you.
Yes.
A favorite movie?
So I'm not a big movie guy, but I am deeply in love with the 1960s movie Inherit the Wind with Spencer Tracy and Frederick March and Gene Kelly, which is a dramatization of the Scopes monkey trial.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
I have another one.
That's okay.
City Lights with Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, yeah.
Is an amazing movie, and it just
is.
makes me almost regret that they added sound to film.
Charlie Chaplin's a wonder. Thank you. And then one last one, a favorite place?
Favorite place? So this is one that if you looked at the picture that I gave you, it was at the Isaac Newton home in Grantham, England. And the reason I was there is that the campus that I work for, University of Evansville, owns a manor house in Grantham, England called Harlexton, which is an amazing and beautiful place. And as part of my job, I am forced to visit at least once a year. And it's a 1950s beautiful manor house with 200 bedrooms, and we've turned it into a study abroad site. And I love being at Harlexton.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, if you haven't, so I always put a bio on the website where you get the link, so you can get more information about Michael and some books and things that he's written, and what he recommended for study materials. He has a great essay that he put on there. It was really the only thing he put on there.
Well, I put a lot more.
Oh, you did?
The first time when Jay asked me for some readings, I gave him about a semester's worth of readings.
I didn't
And
see
he wrote me back and told me to chill.
Did not. I don't remember that.
I had like 3 books on there, and like you ought to read all kinds of stuff.
Anyway, it's a really good essay that was in dialogue about what we're going to talk about tonight. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Michael. Fun to get to know you in a little different way there.
There you go.
There we go. All right. I am going to turn the time over to you, Michael. So just real quick, well, you can say it. You can tell him what you planned. Yeah.
So the way I thought I would approach this in consultation with Jay and Jana is I've got a little PowerPoint presentation, not a long one, but I'm going to go through, and there are 3 points where there's a question that I would like us to then break into smaller groups to discuss. And the questions kind of narrow in. The first question is very general, then a little bit more specific, and then very specific. So the 3 groups that Jana is in charge of that because she knows things. She knows how to do things. So we will break in and out of those groups, and then I hope we can have a good discussion all together at the end. So let me share my screen here. And the presentation is called Religion and the Good Life. And this is, where are you? This is something that I have thought about a lot in my life, and I've never really written about, probably because it's just such a complex topic, not just religion and the good life, but other than faith. What is there about religion that's important? I recently finished a book on who I call a great Mormon writer, Vardis Fisher, who was an atheist. He did not believe in God, but religion played some kind of an important role in his life. And I've long been fascinated by different kinds of atheists. And I'm absolutely sure that I can tell the difference between a Catholic atheist and a Jewish atheist and a Mormon atheist by what they don't believe in. The kind of God that you don't believe in, the kind of religion that you don't believe in, I think also has an important effect on you. So that's really what I'm trying to look at. What about religion if we don't worry about the next life? I'm factoring out the next life in this discussion and just look at this life. What about religion is valuable? And I do appreciate Jay letting me explore this question, which has never been too far from my mind, but I've never really organized my thoughts before. And I want to start with a question that I have asked myself many times, and I have been asked many times. And that is, how can you pay 10% of your income to a church that does X? Not being a CES employee, I don't have to do this. It's not part of my job contract. And there are a lot of things that, honestly, the church does that I disagree with. And it's a difficult decision to support that with my donations. And the hardest I ever asked myself this question was a little bit after the November 15th policy, the exclusionary policy. And Karen, my wife, and I sat down and really thought through, can we in good conscience do this? And I made a list. I wanted to kind of look at all of our expenditures, and I'm going to reproduce the list here. It's not exact. It's a lot of guessing and estimation, but it's roughly, where does my income go? 10% of it goes to tithing, I found out. About 25% of it goes to the government of the United States. And for most of the time I was doing this, that meant Donald Trump. About 10% goes to the state of Indiana and various local government entities with taxing authority. I live in Indiana. When I was making this list, our governor, Mike Pence, had just become the vice president of the United States and was succeeded by somebody even a little bit more conservative. About 15% to whoever holds my mortgage these days, probably the Russian mob, because who knows who holds your mortgage. They sell those off and bundle those off. And So I have no idea where that money goes. For all I know, it could be being used to torture baby seals. About 10% of it goes to our local Kroger's variety and various grocery stores and restaurant chains for food. About 10% of my money for books goes to the richest person in the world, Jeff Bezos. And another 10% goes to the richest family in the world, Walmart, for various things. About 4.5% goes to health insurance and big pharma for all of the things that keep my blood pressure from going through the roof. And a similar amount goes to gas and big oil companies. And about 1% goes to gas station donuts. So I put this all together into a pie chart. And what I found was that about 99% of my money goes to people and institutions that I disagree with. And then 1% goes to donuts. And I'm all about donuts, and I'm willing to increase that. But basically, where I came down on the tithing question was, I'm paying 10% of my income to an institution that I disagree with, and that doesn't really differentiate it much from the other 90% of my income, which I pay to people that I disagree with. I can't follow my dollars and make sure that they're all going to things that I agree with. And so that all of a sudden became a much more complicated question for me. And I spent a lot of time thinking about why we remain affiliated with all kinds of organizations that we disagree with, because this problem doesn't just apply religiously. This problem applies to where you eat. It applies to what you drive. It applies, we live in a country that has done some pretty awful things that I have a difficult time supporting. And yet I choose to stick with a lot of these things. And that's really the first thing I would like us to discuss. So we're going to break into groups fairly early on. And I'm going to ask us to discuss not about the church, but why do we remain part of any organization, any institution? Why do we remain affiliated with anybody when there are serious disagreements and where our participation tends to support those disagreements? I mean, you read Thoreau, read Civil Disobedience, and he said he's going to spend a night in jail because he doesn't want to pay taxes to support the Mexican-American War, and he cannot allow himself to be part of that. I mean, it was a night in jail, it wasn't a lifetime. But that's his argument, was that we should withdraw our support from organizations and institutions that we believe are doing harm with our support. And yet very few of us can or do that consistently. So let's kind of break into groups, and let's do about 5 minutes on this one, Jana. I think it's not quite as important as the other two. So let's do 5 minutes and just talk about generally, without talking about institutions, why do we stay part of our country? Why do we stay part of our state? Why do we continually not enact all of our values in the ways that we distribute our money and our support?
Nigel.
So I hope, and feel free to kind of break in a little bit, but I hope what we figured out in that discussion was, first of all, we never do anything for just one reason. Motivations are always complicated. And I'm hoping everybody found that there were some reasons that were something like noble. I stay so I can change. I stay so I can make a difference. There were some reasons that were just sort of laziness. It's habit. I don't want to find another country. It's hard. All that passport stuff, all that visa stuff, like just easier to stay here. It's convenient. It's the force of habit. It's inertia. And there are some downright selfish reasons we stay. I get stuff. There are things of value that I get. I would rather buy my book from Amazon and have it shipped to my door than have to drive somewhere. I would rather buy this at Walmart than have to pay twice as much somewhere else. So there is this combination of motivations. And remember, we're not even talking about religion yet. We're just talking about, in general, Why do people affiliate themselves commercially, fraternally, or in all kinds of other different ways with institutions that they disagree with on many issues? The two main affiliations in my life are the Mormon Church, and I use that word very intentionally. If you read my article that Jay posted, you'll see why, rather than the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But the Mormon Church is one, and higher education, the academy, is the other one. And both of them drive me crazy a lot of times. Higher ed drives me nuts. Professors drive me nuts. Mormons drive me nuts. But these are my primary two identities, and I stick with them both for a lot of different reasons. And anyone want to offer any wisdom from your group on this? I don't want to. I know we can't do a lot of discussion in the big groups, but I'm interested in your insights. Okay. You don't have. Oh, Valerie.
I was just really impressed with some of the members of my group because I fall more in the laziness, selfishness kind of categories, and personal benefit. My husband works for Amazon; they pay him very well, but I was really impressed because some of the members of our group are really following their consciousness, and they're shopping local, and they're driving electric cars, and one of them says that they don't pay tithing, but they pay tithing to other organizations that they feel doesn't cause harm to their LGBT loved ones. And so it made me just really think about how much am I doing out of convenience, and what are the ways I could find those balances. But I don't think there's ever going to be an easy answer, because there's always going to be pros and cons to, and good and bad, in every choice we make.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I don't mean to suggest that we just give up and we not try to use our allegiance and our financial support to support the things that we care about and the things that we believe in. But my point is that none of us do that completely. All of us, and I'm not sure it's even possible. Somebody in our group brought up something called The Good Place, which I don't know anything about. But apparently they had an episode in The Good Place, whatever that might be, about how hard it is not to do bad in a world where everything is so interconnected. So let's kind of move on then. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. And now let's talk about specifically religion. And I want to talk about, again, not looking at Latter-day Saint religion or Mormon religion specifically, but just looking at the question of, why do people stay in churches? Why do people leave churches? What is the value that people bring or derive from their religious affiliations? And this is a 2018 Pew survey, and I think they do really nice work at Pew. And they looked at they asked people all of these different reasons. Why do you go to church? And this was the main question. They did the same thing about people who don't go to church and asked them why they don't go to church. But among US adults who say they attend services at least once or twice a month, these are the answers that they gave it. And what I want you to notice about these is that the answers are not consistent with either the good, the neutral, or the self-interest. They're all over the place. To become closer to God, so my children will have a moral foundation, to make me a better person, comfort in times of sorrow. I find the sermons valuable, to be part of a community, to continue the family's religious traditions, religious obligation. I like to meet new people, want to make my family or my spouse or my partner happy, so I go. And these aren't exclusive answers. People could answer as many of these as they wanted, and they kind of grouped the most important reasons all the way down to the least important reasons. But what you can see is that people have a lot of different reasons that they participate in a religious institution, a religious organization. Nobody does anything for one reason. It's not even possible to do something for only one reason. So we have a lot of different motivations, a lot of different things move us to go to church. Some of these have to do with faith and belief and believing that what we're participating in is true in some sort of absolute metaphysical sense. But that's actually not the biggest part of it, or that's not the only part of it. And what I'd want to go through just in the next few minutes are 3 answers to this question by people that I admire greatly. And the question is, why, other than faith or belief, what is the value that we can find in religion? And I want to go through 3 kind of different answers to this question. First one comes from Matthew Arnold. Anybody know who Matthew Arnold was? Fascinating guy. He was a Victorian. He was a contemporary of Darwin's. He was a non-believer. He wrote a number of books on religion, the most famous being Culture and Anarchy, but he also wrote, I think, an amazing book called St. Paul and Protestantism, God and the Bible. So he was a student of religion. He did not believe in God. He was a thoroughgoing Darwinist, but he was also an Anglican and thought that everybody should be an Anglican. He was in favor of the Anglican compromise in England, which, if you're familiar with the Anglican compromise of the 19th century, it was, you can believe anything you want as long as you call yourself an Anglican. You can be a high church Anglican, and that just might as well be a Catholic. You can be a low church Anglican, and that might as well be a Pentecostal. You can be a broad church Anglican and shake hands with Unitarians, but you had to be an Anglican. And Arnold was behind that. And this is why. Arnold was a poet. He was a mediocre poet. He has one really good poem, Dover Beach. You've probably heard Dover Beach. The sea is calm tonight, blah, 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 blah. It's really wonderful poem, but he wasn't a very good poet. So after not being a very good poet for a while, he then became a literary critic, which is what we do. I mean, literary critics are people like me who aren't good enough to be writers, but like to write about writers. And as a critic, he really was the Victorian proponent of culture. He was a snob. He liked the things that snobs like, but he believed, and he believed this very sincerely, that religion gives people a common vocabulary for discussing important and sublime things. The Bible has no metaphysical truth to it, but it's a wonderful presentation of the way that we organize our hopes and aspirations. And so the Bible is worth reading. But more than that, if it weren't for the Bible, we wouldn't, or if it weren't for religion, we would have very little art. Arnold lived before the 20th century when you pretty much only painted religious things. You only wrote music for religious services. You only wrote, you only drew or wrote poetry and literature with religious themes. I mean, Paradise Lost, all of the art of the Renaissance, all of the great mass music, Bach, and all of the religious writings. Religion for Arnold gave us the tools that we needed in order to build culture. It did with the Greeks. All of their work is religious in some way. It did with the Indian subcontinent. The great works, the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, all of these are religious works. So religion gives us the tools for culture, Arnold thought. And without religion, we would have almost no way to create great art and great literature and great music and great poetry. And so Arnold held on, and he said everybody should be an Anglican, everybody should be religious, not because there is a God, but because we need poetry. T.S. Eliot, a generation later, would take this idea in The Wasteland and talk about what a tragedy it is when we don't have religion. and all we have are fragments that we can shore against our ruin. So, so Matthew Arnold, we should all be religious because it gives us culture. That's one, and you know, I'm kind of presenting this in a sarcastic way, but he's got a point. For most of human history, culture and religion have been inseparable. Until the 20th century, virtually no important writer or musician or artist did not use religious themes and a religious vocabulary. So, so that's one reason that people believe that religion adds value. Another one, and this is a little bit more modern, and that is the, if any of you know who Rodney Stark is, he's a sociologist of religion. He has written about Mormonism quite a bit, about Islam quite a bit, but he's not the only person, but he's really the most important social scientist who has applied rational choice economic theory to religion. And rational choice is a theory of economics that says that individuals are rational. We rely on rational calculations to make rational choices that result in outcomes aligned with our own best interest. If any of you know who Daniel Kahneman is, he's the economist who won the Nobel Prize for proving that human beings aren't rational and just completely upending rational choice theory. His book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is one of the most interesting books I think I've ever read. But the theory of rational choice holds that people choose to affiliate with religions because they get things out of them. For the same reason we shop at Amazon. We get happiness in this life, and we get intangible benefits in the next life. And if we believe in the next life, then we're making a rational choice. So Stark pushed back against a lot of irreligious or anti-religious sociologists with this. I actually heard him at a conference, he was at an MHA conference back in the 90s. And he had just then moved from University of Washington to Baylor University. And he was pushing back on the bulk of the sociologists who are not just atheistic, but anti-religion. He's saying, no, religion is not a delusion. Religion is a rational choice. People get fellowship and positive feelings and you know, the ability to use the gym for weddings and all sorts of other tangible, physical, material benefits. And within the confines of their own understanding, they gain eternal benefits as well. And we shouldn't treat religion as a delusion. And he really went a long way towards convincing social scientists to stop treating religion as a delusion and to treat it instead as a rational economic choice that some people make and some people don't. So the third thing I want to talk about in this sense, and I'm so glad Jay and I did not coordinate this, but I'm taking this from Gene England's The Church is as True as the Gospel, which Jay posted without us talking to each other as one of the, I was actually going to write you, Jay, and say, why don't you post this? But I never got around to it, but you did anyway, because you know things. And Gene England, who is one of my favorite human beings who has ever lived, who is, I hope you've read both Christine Hagland and Terrell Given's recent books about Gene. And I think we have Charlotte here. Do we have Charlotte here?
Yeah, Charlotte's here, Charlotte England.
Yes. So I think this was probably the most important formative essay of my college years, and the thing that kept me in the church long enough to get through. I mean, I had plenty of support at BYU, but when I went to UC Santa Barbara, there were all kinds of reasons not to stay. And I think this essay really kept me in line. And as I read it, Gene's argument goes something like this. You know, the gospel is the metaphysical part of Mormonism. It's the belief about the afterlife. The church is the human part of it. And what a church does is it puts us in contact with people who aren't like us at all. And this might not happen all the time in Utah, but it sure happens out here in Indiana. You're in a ward with people who you would never, ever meet if you weren't going to church with them, because your lives are so different. And I know that happens in Utah too, but because it's so geographically segmented in Utah, you're usually with people who live on your street. That is not the case in Evansville, Indiana. So we are put in this laboratory where we can learn how to exercise love and compassion. And we have to learn how to see other people, mourn with them and comfort them, and take an active part in their lives, even though they're not associations that we would have chosen voluntarily. And as we become more adept at love, we become better world citizens, and we take what we learn in the church out into the world. And it teaches us how to see from other people's points of view. It teaches us compassion. It teaches us understanding. It teaches us empathy. And what we become, and this last sentence I want to read, because I want to make sure I get this point across. Learning how to love other people qualifies us for heaven in a constitutive rather than a regulatory sense. The kingdom of God is not our reward for loving other people. Loving other people is how we create the kingdom of God. And I learned that from Jean, and I will never forget it. Because that, not just the sociality, it's not that religion is a dating service. Religion is a school in which we can learn how to love and how to care deeply for things very different from ourselves. So this brings us to our second group question. And this is kind of a little bit anticipatory, but without looking at any particular religion, what about religion encourages and supports human flourishing?
How long do we have, Michael? A little longer?
Let's do 10 minutes on this one.
Okay.
Thank you. And I was kind of looking at our third breakout group, and really the questions are the same. So I'm going to give everybody the choice of staying together or going into groups, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For right now, where are you?
Mr. PowerPoint, Mrs. PowerPoint.
So now we're going to come to the our third portion. And this was what we talked about. This is what I talked about in the flyer. So this was how the session was advertised. And it is the notion of eudaimonia. And I put the phonetic spelling here. It's pronounced eudaimonia, and you just think, no, eudaimonia. No, eudaimonia. That's how I remember it. Eudaimonia is the primary concept in Aristotle's ethics. It's also the primary concept in Cicero's rhetoric. Cicero has a whole book that's basically called The Good Life. But it's a difficult concept to translate because it encompasses so many things: living well, the good life, human flourishing. These are all ways that English tries to get to this notion of a life of balance and integrity and contentment, and that the feeling that you're doing the things that you should be doing, the kind of person, you'll know this if you know it, who can look into the mirror of Erised and see themselves holding a pair of thick woolen socks. Everyone get that reference? That's a Harry Potter reference.
Oh.
That's the mirror that you look in and you see what you want. And Harry asks Dumbledore, "What do you see?" And he says, "I see myself holding a pair of socks," because he's so content. So this is Erised, by the way. That Harry, that's the name of the mirror. You look backward, it's just desire spelled backwards.
Oh, clever.
That's tricky. Yeah, tricky stuff. So this is what I'm going to talk about right now is based on really 3 books that are my favorite books for dealing with these issues. These are books that I relied on very heavily in one of my early book projects that I'm going to talk a little bit about. But these are the books. Oh, no, don't do that. Sorry. I hate computers. I have a new computer. It has a touch screen, and I keep forgetting when I touch it, it moves. So one of them, and most of these books are by non-religious writers, but they're books that take religion very seriously from the evolutionary and the cognitive point of view. So the first of them, Why God Won't Go Away, by Andrew Newberg and Eugene Diakil, is a book really by 2 brain scientists, neuroscientists, who have done just a lot of MRI type studies, who've done a lot of really trying to figure out what goes on in the human brain. I mean, they had a whole series of experiments where they would bring in a nun to pray, they would bring in a Buddhist to meditate, they would bring in a Muslim to recite prayers, and they would do this inside of an MRI machine, and they would capture brain images, and they've tried to map how religion functions in the brain. It's a wonderful book, and I love it. The Belief Instinct by Jesse Bering is he is a cognitive psychologist who is an atheist and says he's an atheist, and says, even though I'm an atheist, he has this great story at the beginning where he says, I'm an atheist, I'm a materialist, I've never believed in God, and I was present when my father died, and I could swear I could feel his spirit watching me after he left. And then he goes on to say, why did I, as a materialist atheist, think this? And he talks about how certain instincts that have to do with religion, I'm calling these religion-shaped holes in our brains, certain elements of the human cognitive architecture are they're not religious, but they're cognitive adaptations that religion maps very nicely onto. The third book, and I cannot recommend this book highly enough, Darwin's Cathedral by David Sloan Wilson. He's an evolutionary biologist, again, talking about, and he's an atheist, and he says he's an atheist, but he's an atheist who has a deep regard for religion because he believes that he is the person in contemporary evolutionary biology right now who is probably most responsible for putting the idea of group selection back into the conversation, saying that evolution doesn't just occur on organisms. There is some value, not absolute value, but there's some selection that goes on in groups. And his theories of group selection are very tied in to the reasons why human beings are religious. So I want to talk about this in the context of my first book. And this is not a knowledge producer. You know, there are 3 kinds of books in the world, right? There are knowledge producing books, income producing books, and tenure producing books. And there is virtually no overlap in those 3 kinds of books. So this was my tenure producing book. This is the book that I had to write to get tenure in an English department. And it's called Useful Fictions. And it is a look at cognitive psychology and why in the world human beings everywhere, universally, expend resources on fictional stories when we're supposed to be a species that survives on true information. Why do we basically spend a lot of money on lies that we know to be lies? What's the possible adaptive value could fiction have? And the answer that I came up with, and this took me about 2 years to research, but the answer that I came up with is that human beings are all anxiety-ridden. We are a tremendously anxiety-ridden species, and that's because evolution does not care if we're happy, it only cares if we're alive and if we reproduce. And running away from stuff and being afraid of everything is actually a pretty good evolutionary strategy. So one of the most important things that literature And I'm going to say religion. I do talk about religion some in this book. One of the most important things that narrative does for us, whether it's literature or whether it's religious narratives, is help us resolve anxieties, because we are all basically so full of anxiety that we can barely function. And until SSRIs came along, narratives were our best bet for neutralizing anxiety. So what gives us anxiety? We're the only species that understands that we will die. And that terrifies us. And because death is completely accessible to us, we can't understand it. We can't believe it. We have no basis upon which to believe in death. So the fact that we know we will die causes us tremendous cognitive dissonance. We crave cause and effect narratives that allow us to predict and control natural forces. Probably every human religion has its origins in getting the rain to fall and getting the crops to grow. And the agreements that you make with the deities that you perceive that are always mapped onto natural forces, because we want to be able to predict and control. That is, those are the two vital cognitive apparatuses for neutralizing anxiety. And this is from Jesse Barron's. We have an intuitive sense of something larger than ourselves, something that underlies our existence. We are hardwired to think of something out there controlling stuff. And again, because we want to be able to predict and control, we're programmed to think that there is something that can predict and control. We're motivated to search for underlying purposes and motivations. And we depend on other people for our existence, but we don't entirely trust other people. So we look for universal rules of conduct that create a predictable and rule-bound society. Now, I want you to look at the third bullet point and the fifth bullet point there. We have an intuitive sense of something larger than ourselves. And we depend on other people for existence, and we look for rules. And I'm going to argue, and this is the end of the PowerPoint, so we can stop doing this, but I'm going to argue that in those two principles lie the roots of all human religion. In Christianity, these are the two great commandments. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength. Acknowledge the something beyond you. Acknowledge the something outside of yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. The rule for interacting with other people. And this is universal. It's Confucian, it's Taoist, it's Buddhist, it's Hindu, it's Zoroastrian, it's Muslim, it's Jewish, it's Christian, it's Mormon. The thing beyond yourself and or metaphysics and ethics, understanding and appreciating that thing beyond yourself, and coming up with universalizable rules that can govern human behavior so that our lives are not solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, to quote Thomas Hobbes. And so that's kind of where I come from. I mean, those are the ideas that I bring to this question of religion and human flourishing. The idea that in both our hearts and our brains, there's a God-shaped hole. And that spiritual side of our nature, we can suppress it, like we can suppress every other part of our nature. But until we embrace it in some form, I think we're going to find that we aren't flourishing the way that humans are meant to flourish. And that doesn't mean stay in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and go on a mission. That means those really big questions. When we try to suppress those, when we don't develop a vocabulary for examining those, we're taking away some of the most important tools that we have for human flourishing. And that's kind of where I want to end. And then I think we should stay in a big group. Should we stay in a big group to ask questions?
Yeah, that's fine.
Let's stay in a big group. Thoughts, questions, anything. Ross Collier.
I'm going to go real quick because it's something that Maxine brought up in our smaller group, and I think maybe I can call on her. Was the sacredness of the individual, and maybe I can pass the torch, the baton to Maxine to explain that.
Oh
And we
gosh, I
spoke-
feel bad. We preempted Ross Collier here. Do you mind waiting a second, Ross?
Totally. I don't need to jump in. I just thought that was an interesting comment.
Well, I just love your whole presentation, dear cousin. This is, I love that, of course, that you brought up the issue of narrative and the issue that, you know, human beings need stories to make meaning and to make sense of life, and that we, you know that Tolkien and Lewis were talking and debating about the truth in myth, that there's a deeper truth, a mythopoeia in myth, you know, and so that there's a deeper truth there. So anyway, I just love what you've said, and I think it's a really, really important point that we experience the divine individually. That's what we talked about in our group, that it's completely individual, and we have to allow for that individuality to manifest within people, the way that each person relates to their inner self, their inner doorway, to the collective unconscious, if you go with Jung, or whatever, or to, you know, higher self. It's so individual, and we have to honor that. And so anyway, that's pretty much all I was going to say.
Thanks, you too, Ross.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Michael. I'm enjoying it. It's very thoughtful. So Jesse, I forgot his last name, the author, I think, The Belief Instinct.
Yes.
Is the source for we have an intuitive sense of something larger than ourselves that underlies our existence.
Yes.
Okay. Is that ourselves, the we and the ourselves, are we speaking as individuals here? I have an intuitive sense of something larger than me that underlies our existence? Or are we saying we all have an intuitive sense of something larger than humanity?
He's saying that
underlies our existence.
all human beings.
Wait.
Okay.
And I'll probably have a follow-up, but I wonder if Jesse was raised in a religion. Do you happen to remember?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Then, so I have that first question. If you answer that, and then I'll have a follow-up probably.
So what's the question?
Is it I have a sense of something larger than me, or I have a sense of something larger than humanity?
I have a sense of something larger than me, is what he says.
Okay, so that could be just other people?
It could be other people.
Could just be
God could be other people, and so could hell, as Sartre says.
Well, if that's okay, that makes more sense to me, because I'm not too sure that. I wonder if an intuitive sense of something larger than humanity isn't really necessarily that intuitive. I wonder if that's taught or instilled. Do you have any comment on that?
So what Behrens is an expert in the field of cognitive science known as theory of mind.
Yeah.
And have you ever heard of that term before?
Oh, yes.
So yes, he's a theory of mind guy. So his sense is that because we have this amazing hard-won evolutionary ability to understand things from a different perspective, we're sort of hardwired to project that, and very often we end up projecting it into trees and rocks and the sun. You know, that theory of mind that helps us understand other people, we often project it, and he would say incorrectly, but he would still say we often project that into nature and endow it with a mind that we have a theory of.
Thank you.
Who else would like to? You can put your little yellow hand up if you want. Looking. Don't all speak at once.
I don't see where the little hand is, so I'm just going to speak up. And just sort of along with that same question, I read or heard something recently, and I can't tell where it was, that a requirement, or not a requirement, but what is a foundation of happiness, which is what we're talking about with eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia. No, eudaimonia.
Thank you, I love it. Is that you have to be able to have a sense of awe, and which is the same thing as recognizing something greater than yourself.
Yes.
And I appreciate that concept.
That's absolutely true. A sense of wonder.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Anybody else? Joseph Benyon.
That's Papa Joe, by the way. Just say Papa Joe. Are you there, Papa Joe?
I'm here. I'll turn my volume back up, or Joe the Potter, depending. First of all, I love these books that you've suggested, Mike. I just finished reading The Tangled Tree, which is essentially a history of our understanding of how life came into being from Darwin through, it ends with the death of Carl Woese. And I just loved it. And so I'm going to jump right into Wilson's book. It just looks like the next good thing. But I believe that every person in this world is a receptor of the Spirit of God, the light of Christ, as we call it in Mormonism. But that God is going to, as the Book of Mormon teaches, God is going to speak to us according to our language and our understanding, which is culture. And so every culture, every religion, every language is precious and important because it represents a certain tribe or group or nation's view of how this all came into being. And I look at science as just another tribe. And I think it's very important that these old stories are held on to and studied. I cut my teeth in the early 80s on Joseph Campbell and this idea that every story is important and that all the stories weave a tapestry. And so I kind of resist this notion of the one true church. But I love my tribe. I love Mormonism, and I can't be dissuaded from it. Not so much of its absolute truthfulness or historicity, but of its value as a lens for looking at these things. And I have a great hope, maybe riffing off of what Martin Luther King Jr. said, that what did he say? The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that the arc of our faith is long, but it bends towards justice, that we will have equality, we will have inclusion, we will have, in other words, to borrow a phrase from Dieter Uchtdorf, don't sleep through the restoration. It's ongoing. At some point, we're going to get this right. And it might be that it's all the tribes of the earth coming together at Adamon and laying their piece of it on the table and then making sense of it.
Thank you for that. I absolutely agree.
Go ahead.
So my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, was Joseph Campbell's TA at Cal State Long Beach in the 60s. So I live a lot with Joseph Campbell memories.
I bet you do. So we've got just maybe 2 more minutes, and then Andy Pitcher Davis has a musical number for the end. So I just want to be respectful of people's time at 9 o'clock. And then what time is it where you are, Michael?
I'm on Central Time.
Okay.
So I live in this tiny little sliver of Indiana that's not Eastern Time, but that is so close to Eastern Time that my phone often latches onto a tower and changes time on me.
So it's
and
a bit
messes
late,
up my schedule.
a bit later where you are.
I'm Central.
I want to be respectful of that. You know, I'm open for a little longer for those who want to stay after we close with a prayer and everything. So is Maxine still on? Where are you, Max? There you are. Maxine, I don't know if you saw in the chat. I was wondering if you would, when it's time, in about 9 when we close, if you would offer a prayer and a blessing.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay. So questions? We have time for maybe one more question. Oh, let's see. I see.
Rick has a question.
Okay, Rick.
Well, what I just try to be brief here. That's always the hardest part. But what I find in general is that you may work through an organization and you may be unhappy that it isn't moving in the direction you want it to, or is not moving fast enough. But I think a lot of maybe it's Eugene England's thought, which I really enjoyed, was it's learning how to work with other people is probably more important than being concerned about whether you're really achieving your ends or not. I also wanted to say any attempts at creating the ideal society that have been attempted in secular form, shall we say utopian pursuits, generally don't work out so well. So I would say that the spiritual dimension to people's lives cannot really be divorced from the pursuit towards personal well-being and excellence, especially in terms of the collective whole.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. Michael, do you have some closing? You want to wrap it up for us?
Just to say that, I'm talking about my spiritual path here, and everyone has their own. And I honor everybody's path, and I honor everybody's decisions. And I think that we all have to answer these questions, and they're hard questions. I think in our group, we talked about all the potential that religion has to do good and all the potential that religion has to do bad. And there are a lot of things that we balance as human beings. For me, religion and spirituality are always going to be part of that mix. And that doesn't mean I'll always react to them the same way. But I value Mormonism because it's my spiritual language. It's my native tongue when I'm talking about things that matter the most to me. I do not look to the church to give me answers. I think it's enough to give me the vocabulary that I need to frame the questions. And I just thank you all for listening to this little piece of my journey.
Thank you, Michael. I just thought you did a wonderful job. I really did, in facilitating our thinking and conversations about a super important topic. I know in general, we didn't address Brad Wilcox specifically. If you're interested, there's a lot online about that. Patrick Mason wrote a really nice piece in a online publication called The Public Square. I also got a piece published there about Brad Wilcox. That's on the website, ThinkAgain-FaithAgain.life under Consider. So you can kind of read our takes on that. I'm deeply grateful that somebody, the Stake filmed Brad Wilcox, and that they posted it. I think it's super helpful to know that's going on, so we can actually address some things that I think need to address.
Get over here. Shit. Get over here. You're in the wrong place.
So anyway, I'm going to mute you, Tom. Anyway, thank you. Andy, I'm going to turn some time over to you, and then we'll go right from Andy to Maxine Hanks giving us a prayer and a blessing afterwards. And then I'm willing to stay on for a little while for those who want to chat for a little bit, maybe for another half an hour. And we'll go to there.
Great.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. And Michael, this was brilliant. It was really super important for us to understand these things and bring these together. I don't know if this is, I don't believe it is a tangent off of this conversation. And Jay, I don't know if you came up with some images, but you
I didn't.
talked about, well, this is the thing that came to mind. Jay reached out to me, and I am in a blur, and so this was a respite for me. And he said, how about a musical number? And the first thing that came to mind when we were talking, first of all, about Brad Wilcox and the changes that we need to have, but also in general, was How Long, O Lord, Most Holy and True, which is a hymn that is uniquely Mormon in many ways, because the text is by John A. Whitsoe, who is a scientist. So whoever mentioned that scientists are part of their tribe. And then the music is by B. Cecil Gates, as in Brigham. So this is Brigham's grandson. It is interesting. I've kind of dovetailed it with, and I haven't done enough research to know that these are necessarily one and the same, but I believe they very much are in reference to each other, and Maxine may know more. With one of my very favorite essays ever by Talmage, James Talmage, which is How Long, O Lord, How Long? And it is, and in this way, I would be very cautious to use that phrase in an appropriation, but he uses this in 1918 or during World War I, the Great War. And I think maybe, Jay, rather, in the interest of time, rather than explain it all, what I'd like to do is say maybe this is a dog ear this conversation for a later date, because I am concerned about what is going on globally, but also it's a long conversation. The points that I wanted to point out, Talmage was, and I really love this essay. One of the things was I'm struck by the sense of our genealogy and our heritage of pacifism, and maybe Gene, as you talked about Gene, Michael, possibly this is we equate that with maybe Hubie Brown, but maybe some of this came from the Talmage collective. He was beginning to speak about the war in 1914, and he you have to remember that Talmage was English born, so he's European, and he also has a son in the war, and he takes a stance on the war 3 years before the U.S. even joins the First World War, and it isn't until 1918 that that President Smith begins to speak in conference about that. But I do love, and Maxine really brought this up, and jump in anytime, Maxine, that it is not that it is not just that we must accept the way things are. And he says, and I'll just briefly say this one thing out of, and I've listed the lyrics, but he says two things that I feel like are super important in this essay. And one of them is a witness to suffering. For the most, for much of the forepart of the war, Elder Talmage spoke little of blame and much of the suffering attendant to the war. He was deeply troubled by the scale of human suffering. Every day brings news of the progress of the terrible conflict in Europe, he wrote at the end of August 1914. All the news that comes is censored. It is certain that we do not get the whole truth. But if the dispatches are at all reliable, there are at least under arms over 10,000 men, 10 million men, 10,000 men, men, and the dead already reported number many scores of the thousands, and the end is not yet in sight. He was a peace-loving man, and he was very shocked and dismayed by this drama of the death, and he prayed mightily for a speedy termination, which I think we all are right now. And he says the news of war becomes more terrible with the days. The fatalities and other catastrophes are horrible to contemplate. The other thing I really feel like is important, and I think this is where we do dovetail into the Brad Wilcox and what is immovable, and where it is that we just have this idea of accepting the Lord's will or not. He says the role of God in war, and he says, as the role of providence, the war was neither God's doing, nor for that matter, Satan's alone. And quote, some go so far as to say that the hand of God being in all things, God himself is responsible for all that is and for all that takes place. I have heard it taught by advocates of the frivolous theology that whatever is in accordance with the will of God. My whole soul revolts against such concepts as that. Ever the advocate of agency of man, this strict anti-determinist went on to describe as absurd the belief that God's infinite foreknowledge determines what takes place. Let us be men and be willing to take blame for our evil acts if we have chosen evil. And this is really important, he says, nor was this war, strictly speaking, the devil's own doing. If Satan and his hosts were bound today and no longer able to work personally upon the earth, evil would go on for a very long time, because he was very able, he has very able representatives in the flesh. So as we go into this hymn, How Long, O Lord, Most Holy and True, remember two things: that we can plead on the Lord for change, and we must. And the other thing is that the battle is long, and we must pace ourselves. And with that, I'm just going to turn over to a recording that I made with the vocalists Miriam Stay, Kristen Washburn Juarez in the Kirtland Temple. Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, I thought you had it right.
Oh, did I send it to you?
You did, but I thought you were gonna, sorry.
I'm so bad at sharing. Michael, you have it as well. Do you want to share it?
While they're looking for that, should I add a comment?
Yeah, go for it.
While they're looking for
Michael?
that. Or has he found it?
Michael's looking for it.
Okay, well, he's looking for that. I'll just add to what Andy said. I thought it was great that she brought in Talmage and also Joseph F. Smith. Going back to Michael's theme about how religion helps us to connect to something bigger, more transcendent, bigger than ourselves. Talmage makes his statement at General Conference in 1914, and Joseph F. Smith shares his vision of the redemption of the dead at conference in 1918. So Talmage, right as the war starts in Europe, and JFS a year after the US gets into the war. And both of them, they give really different, they both share their personal revelations, really, about the meaning. In a way, they're making sense of this war, and they're very different. They're very different. Talmage is basically saying, God is not responsible for the war, human beings are, and somehow God will make something good come out of all this. And JFS, of course, has his vision of the redemption of all the dead. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about in terms of how a church leader reaches out to try, to the divine or the transcendent, to try to figure out their own connection to that in the face of this horrible world war, the Great War.
I also think it's interesting that the title of this hymn is How Long, O Lord, Most Holy and True, because as you mentioned, Maxine, he starts in 1914, and there's a lag time until the establishment catches up. And I think we need to be patient with that. We must have that in mind. It does take a long time for the mainstream to kind of come around to some of these more progressive or more brave and these new ideas. And so I think we need to build into our matrix to be patient and not to be just cut off any kind of change within the church because we're not willing to sort of give it time to come to fruition. And we can go ahead and play it.
All right, thank you.
True.
One little note, I love this piece. I took some liberties, but it ends on a dissidence. And I think we must accept the dissidence and embrace it.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for sharing your beautiful talent there. Okay, Maxine.
Okay. Dear Creator or Source of our being, our lives, as we enter into the Christian Lenten season of deeper work and introspection into our own life and struggles and fears and suffering and hopes, and trying to make sense of all these things, open to us the inner doorway to ourselves. Help us move into the mystery of our own being, our existence, our humanness, and the transcendent or larger aspects of our lives that seem to be bigger than us. Help us to see our connection to both the deepest self and the largest or larger dimension of our lives. Help us to see our own presence and the power in our presence, to see the self and the selves we haven't seen before, and our influence and our effect on others. Help us to be mindful and present to our presence and the presence of others and the ways that we affect each other. Please give us this sense of freedom and courage and permission and the right to discover who we really are, if that's possible, or who we want to be, who we need to be, who we were born to be. Give us the strength to pursue that, and give us the love and the grace to hold that sacred space for others, to have that same freedom, to delve deep and deal with anything that needs to be seen and known. Help us to see that at our core, there is a desire to live and love, and help us to express that in every way that we feel a need or desire to do. Please be present with us, or help us be present with ourselves and with others at all times. For we are walking an inner path to discover the ineffable within, and to participate in a mystery that was and is becoming, that is who we are and our lives. We ask for these graces and blessings, and I ask that a blessing be given to every person here tonight, that they will know their worth, their indisputable, inner-born worth and freedom, and the right to pursue their lives as they feel moved and directed to do, and that we will hold each other and be there for each other. And I ask this blessing in the name of the eternal light, intelligence, and truth inborn within us all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Again, you can hang out a little bit if you'd like, if it's okay with Jana. I should have asked Jana that. Gee, sorry, Jana.
Fine. Should I stop the recording here, Jay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably good.
You don't want to hear what I have to say.